learn from all of you. I'm also not even super active, a little bit active on Twitter, at least this week. So if you want to reach out there, then definitely down to chat there as well. All right, so let's get into it. So today I'm going to talk about where we are presently with AI and UX. I think I was really inspired by what I think Husani said earlier about this notion that X is going to change the world or X is going to change everything. And I think AI is definitely having that moment, specifically generative AI. And as UX practitioners, it's a really interesting space and moment for us because we're thinking about how will generative AI or AI writ to do that. All right. So today it is 2023, and it seems like AI is everywhere. AI is changing the world. It's in our devices, it's in our tablets and our phones. For those of you who were in the tech check earlier, it's in my light bulbs. Some of you might have smart homes, smart devices. It's used in sort of generals. Up top on the right, you have Gmail with its smart reply feature, and beneath you have Android Studio, which is a tool for developers that also has smart features to drive productivity. And these are but two of many tools out there that use AI or report to use AI to help people get their work done more efficiently. So regardless of how we think about AI and sort of our sensitivity to it, it really does feel like it is permeating many parts of our lives and really beginning to get us going in various ways. And obviously, we're starting to see AI in creative spaces. Over the last couple of years, over the last couple of months, really in the last year, we had this explosion of tools such as Dolly and Midjourney that have allowed people to create illustrations, edit photos, reimagine visual art, basically, with AI. So we're thinking AI is here and it's going to guide creativity. But as UX professionals, what does that mean when AI comes to UX design? So this is a good question. But as it happens, it's not really even new that AI is part of the design process. For some time, we've actually seen a rise in AI-powered functionality in design tools. Think about Figma and its auto layout functionality that's been around for, I think, a few years now. So auto layout can adjust your design and reconfigure it for different circumstances. It can move content around, it can move components around. And people have been using that and extolling its virtues for some time. So even though it doesn't look like Midjourney and Dolly, it's definitely become a part of the design process. And then, of course, ChatGPT burst on the scene, and we have Bard pictured here. And that speaks to this rise in generative AI and generative content. I saw in Slack people have been talking about different circumstances where they've been using ChatGPT to do research or to write their content, to write their decks. Um, and I think that this is something that is definitely sort of in the zeitgeist right now. So these tools have absolutely revolutionized writing, allowing people to create anything from poetry to songs to their own content and all kinds of fun experimentations. So with the rise of this tooling, we've also started to, or sorry, with the rise of generative AI, we've also seen a rise in Figma plugins and other kinds of UX tools that generate content or visuals. So once again, AI has really begun to permeate the design process for many people and open the doors even to the design process for those who might not have traditionally been engaging in it. So this is exciting, but ultimately, it's not without concern. The rise of AI, and specifically generative AI, has led to a lot of speculation about changes in the UX industry. We've heard a lot of that Gen AI is going to change everything, ChatGPT is going to change everything, and here are all the ways that your design process will become better, faster, harder, stronger, whatever Daft Punk says. Um, but it's also led to some speculation about the obviation of UX designers. So there's been tremendous excitement and enthusiasm, but also simultaneously a lot of trepidation. If you go on Twitter or LinkedIn or you look at blogs, you start to see posts and tweets like, will AI replace UX design? Is the UX design profession doomed? How will AI-based tools change how designers work? So that's kind of scary. But at the same time, there's also a fair amount of skepticism. Some people are arguing that these tools are good for spinning up ideas or for ideating, but ultimately, they don't always capture user, that is UXer intent. They don't always work the way we expect. There you can find scores of examples of AI misrepresenting things or doing things wrong, or as I used to say, AI behaving badly. So this is very much a work in progress, and we'll talk more about that later and what that means. Over the last while, my team has been thinking about this and asking this question. What is the impact or potential for AI or assistive tooling in the design process? How do designers feel about it as well? So I think there's the discourse between what can it do and what is the perception or the perceived value, which I'll talk about in a moment, of AI in design. Um, how does it help designers? How do they feel that it helps them? And how does it inhibit? What might it do that you don't want it to do? In other words, is it cool? Is it creepy? Is it concerning? Or some combination of the above? Said another way, what is the value of AI in the design process? So our research has looked at designers and to an extent other UX professionals as well as developers and how they intend to or are using AI in design, where they think it could benefit them, what they're looking for it to do, the opportunities that they think it unlocks, and then ultimately what happens when they actually engage with these things. I have an asterisk next to AI because I think one of the challenging things about AI, and especially in the face of the rapidly evolving generative AI world, is that it can actually be really hard to tell what is AI and what isn't. And I think there are a ton of resources out there for and a lot of discourse around how do you design with AI, how do you design for AI. But if you're not an AI or machine learning professional, which like certainly I am not, even though I work in the AI space, um, it can be really hard to tell when a technology is truly AI powered and when it's different kind of computation. So my big caveat here is that anytime that we're talking about AI in this context, I mean things that are both truly genuinely AI powered, as well as things that are perceived to be AI but might not actually be, because your average user, even a technology expert, may not know the difference. Let's talk about enterprise, because that's why we're here. So ultimately, enterprise has a long history of automation, going back to the ancient civilizations or the Industrial Revolution or the rise of the first computers, depending on how you want to think about it. And as always, there's been a mix of enthusiasm and concern. To what extent does automation enable professionals, explorers, enthusiasts, and consumers to enter new domains? How does it help them automate parts of their jobs that they don't like or tasks they don't want to do? And to what extent does it interfere? So this has been a focus for a long time in industrial organizational psychology, the manufacturing world, the hardware world. Professionals and researchers there have wrangled with this question, noting what people in their space embrace and where they stray away from automation, and where they find it concerning or overbearing. So for instance, automation might help someone do a task more efficiently. It might help them make fewer mistakes. It might allow them to do things that it's not really safe for humans to do or very difficult for humans to do, and it could even potentially save lives. But some worry that it misunderstands their intent, or worse, as we've already seen in the UX speculation, it threatens their job. Others, though, have a different perspective. Some people, particularly experts in a given field, have embraced automation because it's allowed them to quite literally expedite their process. It allows them to focus on things that are more interesting to them, potentially more creative, more challenging, or things that at this point you really can't hand over to a machine. So we'll talk more about this in a couple of minutes, but one example that I like to go to is film editing. So back in the day, if you wanted to edit a film, you had to do what this guy is doing. You literally had to cut and splice a physical strip of film, look at it with a magnifying glass, and decide what you wanted to do with it. And if you wanted to make movies, then you had to know how to do this. It was involved and expensive. Automation, though, has changed that. With the advent of software like iMovie, anybody who has access to it can create and edit a film. You don't need to know how to do this. You don't even need to know what these things are. So that's really opened the door to people who are new to the space or who are curious about the space. But for those who are experienced, advanced filmmakers, these tools will also automate away a lot of the basic tasks. So, for example, you can cut and splice with a computer in seconds, as opposed to having to manually inspect a film strip and cut it up. Um, and that allows them to focus on more sophisticated, more creative editing techniques. So there's a dual benefit here. Novice users are able to try things out, but by taking away the difficult and mundane aspects of this work, it also allows experts or emerging experts to focus on the challenging and creative pieces. So that's an example where automation has, in many ways, opened the door to a lot of possibility and enhanced creativity. So based on what we've seen about automation throughout history, and also what we're seeing in the field today, this has been my team's working hypothesis. AI is valuable in design when it extrapolates away mundane work. So let's talk about some of what we've learned here. So I'll talk about a couple of things that we've done. Obviously, this is, as I said, an emergent field. It's very much an interest of mine. Once again, we'll plug anyone reaching out to me or talking about this on Slack because I think it's something that's fascinating and I would love to hear where other people are with this. I will also give a shout out to friends in the academic world. This is the problem of AI in design, or how AI can influence design and creative processes, has actually been a big focus in a lot of academic labs. So as part of this work, we had the privilege of reading lots of papers and meeting lots of academic researchers who are looking at this problem and learning from them. So definitely have some recommendations for work and papers to share if you're curious. Um, we also wrote a paper or a case study that came out at Chi this year, and I've put the link at the bottom. I'll also share it in Slack if you want to learn more about some of our work and some of the work that we are building off of that others have done. So one of my favorite things, and we heard a lot about this yesterday as well, is to do participatory design. Um, we've done a lot of workshops with design and development professionals to understand their attitudes towards AI and AI in design. So whenever you're designing or thinking about novel technologies, so technologies that people don't have experience with or that might be new to a population, it can be really key to bring those end users into the design and ideation processes. Because how you, as someone who is knowledgeable about that technology, perceive it, understand it, think about its value is ultimately going to be different than how someone who's new to it thinks about it. But I think this is doubly important when something is deeply personal. So in this case, all of us are UX professionals, but we probably have a variety of viewpoints about what we want to automate or not in our work, and sort of how we see AI as a boon or potentially an interference to our processes. So I really liked to be able to bring in UX professionals and learn from them and sort of envision what they think the benefits and drawbacks are. And that those workshops might look like things. I mean, this was actually a workshop at Chi 2022 where we made very literal paper prototypes and pipe cleaner prototypes to illustrate what AI could do in creative tools. But you can also create storyboards. Do you can prototype small projects. You can draw pictures. But ultimately, you want to be able to communicate the intent and understand the perspective. So, as I said, one of the issues, and Husani said this very nicely earlier with the X is going to change anything, but one of the issues of new technologies, and I think AI is experiencing this in a very dramatic way right now, or when you take a known technology and apply it to a novel concept or a novel device or something like that, is that it's very easy to conflate hype and utility. Right now, there are so many cool things you can do with AI. But ultimately, when you apply AI, are you solving the right problem? Is the problem that you're trying to solve even a problem at all? I think this is doubly important in enterprise contexts when you're looking at productivity tools to get things done. So it's not just about delighting the user or demonstrating something cool, but ultimately people a lot of the time are using your tools to do their work. And that's what matters at the end of the day. So this is where it's really critical to measure perceived value. What is the problem? And does your concept or your prototype truly address it? Would your users actually use it as you envision it? Why or why not? And again, this is for me, I think if I had to say one thing about researching AI and anything, but AI applied to any user experience, I'd say this is the most important part of the process. Are you really using AI in a way that is interesting, useful, and actionable to your end users? So in our case, we took concepts that were generated in some of the workshops we ran and turned them into speculative scenarios. So literally written scenarios that we investigated with different sets of UX professionals. So we use these as a vehicle to understand their attitudes towards AI and their design tools. But ultimately, we focused more on the potential solution space than the details of the solution itself. So really starting at the top of the funnel and then trying to winnow our way down. Some practitioners that we've met have done this with concept testing, which is totally fine using a rough prototype. So one other thing that I think certainly to me was very intimidating when I started working in AI is this notion that to really simulate AI, you need a full-on working machine learning model. You need to be able to demonstrate the predictability or personalization that comes with a lot of AI-driven experiences. And that certainly helps, but you don't actually need to build a working model to do this a lot of the time when you're doing perceived value work. You can do it with Wizard of Oz testing, you can do it with storyboards. But what's important is that you're inviting your participants to imagine how they might use this experience, what issues it might resolve, and what concerns it might elevate. So one of the vehicles that we used to investigate this with our speculative scenarios was through a survey. So we surveyed many UX professionals about their attitudes towards AI in their work. This included truly AI-driven design experiences, as well as just general automation, so productivity tooling as in general, and then attitudes towards AI also in consumer concepts and beliefs about AI in general. So really trying to get a picture of how much are people embracing this concept, how eager are they to use it and apply it in different veins of their working and personal lives. So drawing upon the workshop output, we use these speculative scenarios to create a framework for where AI might be useful in the design process and where it might not. Here's an example of a speculative scenario. So again, this was something that came out of some of the workshops. Imagine that you had a design tool that could recreate your design for any layout or device. So when you use this tool, you can automatically convert a design for iOS into a design for a large screen display. So we gave them this scenario, we asked them to interpret it for us and also about their likelihood to use this tool were it available to them, and then pros and cons and other concerns or benefits that they think things like this elevate. And we had a number of these. If you look at the Kai paper, you can see the other ones. We learned a lot of interesting things from this research, but I would say, generally speaking, this one of the highlights was that there are two main areas where participants saw or were actively using saw opportunities for or were actively using AI in their work. I think I forgot to say this earlier, but the survey we ran before about a year ago, so before ChatGPT and some of the generative visual design stuff emerged onto the scene. So there was this one bucket of efficiency that includes things like linters. So scanning your designs to make sure that they're accessible, that they meet certain accessibility standards, that they translate well, and other things that are really key to your work but are easy to get wrong and or do incorrectly. And then the other was the generative AI that we are seeing right now. So, for example, being able to generate images or even UIs from with a simple description. So very Dolly or Midjourney like. And people generally embraced both of these, but in very different use cases. You and no, let's take a look at that. So there were two major tension, or really a tension, I would say, between um, these two different areas. So one of them was adherence, being able to help people follow best practices. Um, One participant said, an AI-driven design tool should help me by lowering the redundant work, so reducing a lot of those tedious tasks, and help me focus on the experience and strategy and thinking through these things that are more challenging and more exciting. Um, so that's sort of the linting and efficiency side of things. On the other hand, some participants said with innovation, they wanted to use opportunities to uncover new paradigms. So, for example, that auto layout or reimagining your design in a different context for a different device, speculative scenario that we talked about earlier, or showing a designer how they might be able to adjust their content for a truly novel device or a space that they haven't worked in before. One person likened this to pair programming, the idea that you have an AI driven design tool that sort of serves as your design partner or your design pair programmer. You're bouncing ideas off of it and it helps you think through problems, but ultimately you're in the driver's seat. So one of the things that was notable here is people generally looked at one of these scenarios or the other, or maybe things in the middle, but they weren't always looking for AI to do both. There are certain situations, maybe early on in the process, you want to think through a bunch of different things or ideate in a bunch of different ways. But at the end of the process, you're really just looking for that linter, a spell check kind of situation to make sure that you've hit the requirements and that you're not missing anything really big. So thinking about AI applied in specific ways rather than generally across the process. And ultimately, as I said, this research was done a year ago, so it will be interesting to return to it now that we have so many generative AI tools. But I suspect, given what I'm seeing online, that this sort of mental model will generally hold. There is also another kind of tension between efficiency and agency. So there is a desire to balance making things more efficient. One situation or scenario that multiple participants brought up throughout our research has been this notion like I need to create 10 different versions of something. I design for 6 different devices on 3 different platforms, and I need to rework my design for every single one of these. Could AI help me with that? Just regenerate a bunch of things for me so that I don't have to do that myself. But there is also a concern about maintaining control. What are you giving up to a tool or to AI? When is it not really yours anymore? And this anxiety around agency came in 2 flavors. One of them was just making sure that the AI was doing the right thing. A couple people gave examples of times when productivity tools that were powered by AI misunderstood their intent and ended up creating things that actually took more time to fix than time saved by handing it over to an AI. So an example could be if you're trying to generate a bunch of different different designs for different devices and the AI isn't familiar with the paradigms that you're hoping it will generate, then or generate act on, then you have to spend a lot of time fixing things, and that's ultimately more of a time sink. There's also an element of trust, making sure that what the AI was trained on was actually what you wanted it to be trained on, and that it was again doing the right things. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. So basically reasonable output that makes sense. The other was a desire to preserve craft. And I think this is really interesting because I think it's almost a personal thing. Like when you hand over something to a machine, we've seen this throughout the history of automation. What is really yours? How does it affect your identity as a professional, your relationship to your work? One participant likened UX design to glass blowing and said, well, you can mass produce glass products at scale, but innovation comes from unique contributions from the artists in their glassblowing studio, something that you're really experimenting on and iterating on yourself rather than handing over to a machine. Unique craft work that, in this case, the designer would be producing. So I think this is a really big tension, and I don't think generative AI has solved this. I think if anything, it's made it more complicated. So it's something that we'll want to continue to think about going forward. In other ways, there's a desire for a partnership between AI and UX. Keep the designers in the driver's seat. The designer should be able to sign off on any decision that the AI makes. And this is heavily predicated on trust. So the amount by which a UXer trusts the AI's recommendations will often depend on the task and the individual. I talked or I mentioned trustworthy data sources earlier, and this is obviously a difficult topic because AI is often treated as a black box. You don't really know what's happening under the hood. You don't really know what the model is doing. And again, if you're not a machine learning expert, you probably don't know what the model, even if you knew what the model is doing, you probably don't know how to interpret it. But ultimately, what is it trained on? What are the inputs into the decisions that the AI is making? What are the outputs? What types of material? And how can you make sure that the recommendations it's giving are really accurate and complete? So this is something that we're actively interested in, understanding trust and what drives it, and how it affects users' willingness to adopt or unwillingness to adopt. There was also a certain amount of concern around AI capabilities and the idea that a lot of AI tools aren't really advanced enough to do the work of a UX design professional. So again, that glass blowing analogy. One participant told us, a lot of these tools have a long way to go before they can perform the day-to-day tasks of being a UX designer. There are just too many variables at play that are difficult to quantify. And then they said, this is why I really want to be able to sign off on decisions and make sure that I'm preserving my agency as a UX professional. So, what does this mean in a world where generative AI is the talk of the town? As I mentioned before, we did this study in May 2022, which was right before the rise of generative AI. So ultimately, it's exciting and encouraging to see that so many people were calling for generative AI as part of the process. But as we know, not everyone's embracing it in the same way. They don't trust what it outputs, or they worry about its impact on their career or their relationship to their work. Novel technology can be amazing, but ultimately it's emergent. There are a lot of things that we're learning about. There are a lot of things that are cool and exciting, and there's a lot that doesn't work as expected. I think this is particularly challenging in enterprise scenarios. It can be tempting to hand off processes to automation, perhaps due to precedents, because we've seen this throughout history, or perhaps due to the scale. But it's important to tread carefully. If you automate too much or too soon, what are you losing? What do designers lose? What do your users lose? So I maintain that we should position generative AI as a partner to UX professionals and not a replacement for UX expertise. It's a tool to leverage, but not the entirety of the process. And as Husani said quite brilliantly earlier, there's this perception that X is going to change everything. But I think this is a case where X is going to transform, but not totally overhaul. Mind the hype. One thing that I hinted at earlier was also this relationship between when you think something is AI, but it's actually not. And I think this is particularly important in the with the rise of generative AI and the fact that generative AI has been positioned as something that could supplant the UX design process. It can be really hard to distinguish what is AI generated and what isn't. And we saw this in real time in a study that we did on the material theme builder, which you can check out if you're curious about. It's a tool that uses colors from an image to generate a color palette dynamically. And researcher on my team ran a study on this feature and found that participants thought it was powered by AI and started asking a lot of the questions that we've seen in when we've looked at truly AI generated experiences. How can I get access to the model? What data is it using? I want sign off over what it outputs. So the message here is to consider situations where AI might not be involved, but end users think it is, and apply the same frameworks. And again, perceived value is really key here. It doesn't really matter if something is AI powered or not, because your end users are going to treat it that way. If you want to see more resources around this, I recommend the Pair Guidebook. This is a resource from Google that pulls together best practices and advice and frameworks from AI researchers and professionals and data scientists and UXers around the world. And again, I'll share this link out after. So where does that leave us today? I think we see a lot of opportunities to bring AI into the design process. It can help UXers follow best practices, particularly in spaces that they might not be familiar with or where compliance is critical. Accessibility is obviously huge here. I think internationalization is an interesting opportunity as well, because when you're reconfiguring a design for a different layout, for a different alphabet, for a different writing direction, or even different word density. If you think about languages that represent words with single characters versus languages that tend to have very long words, that is going to have a big impact on things. Also, new devices and surfaces are coming out on a regular basis, and it becomes really important to think about how to design for new contexts that practitioners, even the most experienced, may not be familiar with. Not everyone can be or really should be expected to be an expert in everything. So how can we leverage AI to help share the knowledge and act as a teaching tool? I also was thinking about how does this change at scale or at large organizations, complex systems where you have a lot of domain knowledge. There might also be additional opportunities for AI to help. One one thing that had came up a lot in our research, and I think is a really powerful opportunity, is bringing cross-functional team members into the design process. So this could be anything from another UX professional who doesn't normally design, like a researcher, to a software engineer or product manager, or someone who just wants to make sure that they're building really good, really beautiful, usable, useful, accessible UIs and following best practices that will keep users happy. So AI can definitely generate templates here that could help get that started. Um, Design systems are huge, and many large organizations rely on them to drive consistency across their products. And I think that design system adherence and adhesion is critical here. And we could think about how AI could help with linting there or making sure that that has uptick. And the other thing, I guess this is potentially a little controversial, but how might we use AI to fill in the gaps? At large organizations and small organizations for that matter, it can be really hard to make sure that you have total design coverage. What happens when you can't design everything with love and attention it deserves? What are opportunities to offload simple tasks or hand over pieces of the process to AI? This obviously is dependent on trust and who's involved and how much the organization trusts tools and models and whatnot. But I do think there's an opportunity there. So in Slack or on Twitter, I would love to hear from all of you about where you think AI-powered design tools or experiences could help or inhibit enterprise user experience. I'm very curious about what might be different in enterprise versus consumer versus small organizations and large organizations, and what applies more generally. All right. So to recap, AI is here. It is part of our design process. It has perhaps silently been part of our design process for some time, but is making a very loud entrance now with generative AI and the speculation around it. It does many things that hopefully benefit, allows people to create and explore new things. It allows them to innovate. It serves as a powerful correction tool and align with standards. But ultimately, trust is paramount. And it's really important not to fall prey to the hype, but to ensure that AI is helping users, that they understand what they're getting out of it, rather than something that they see as a threat or something that can overhaul their process in unhelpful ways. And this, as I said earlier, is an emergent space. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting research insights coming out in this space over the years. And I welcome your thoughts and opinions. So thank you so much.
Clara, thank